At first, Gemini makes love feel like a discovery. The conversations flow effortlessly, the laughter comes naturally, and every moment feels mentally stimulating. Being with Gemini feels light, exciting, unpredictable, like something new is always about to happen. But then, something changes. The messages become shorter. The enthusiasm fades. The sparkle in their eyes isn't the same anymore. And suddenly, the person who once seemed completely engaged begins to drift away, emotionally, mentally, energetically. What happened? Many people think Gemini loses interest because they're inconsistent or afraid of commitment. Others believe Gemini simply gets bored easily. But the truth is much deeper and far more revealing. Gemini doesn't lose interest without a reason. They don't detach randomly. When Gemini pulls away, it's because something inside them has already shifted, quietly, subtly, and long before anyone notices. Gemini is ruled by the mind. If their curiosity dies, the connection weakens. If their thoughts stop being stimulated, the attraction begins to fade. And once that happens, even strong feelings may not be enough to keep them emotionally present. What most people don't realize is that Gemini can stay physically close while being mentally gone. They may smile. They may talk. They may even say everything is fine. But internally they are already disconnecting. There are specific behaviors, patterns, and emotional triggers that make Gemini slowly lose interest in love, and many of them go completely unnoticed by their partners. Some reasons seem obvious. Others are subtle. And one of them, almost no one expects. The fifth reason, in particular, challenges everything people think they know about Gemini and relationships. It's not about boredom. It's not about freedom. And it's definitely not about lack of feelings. It's something deeper, something psychological, and once you understand it, you'll never look at Gemini the same way again. If you've ever loved a Gemini, if you are a Gemini, or if you want to understand why their interest can disappear without warning, stay until the end. Because the fifth reason may surprise you and explain more than you ever imagined. Gemini, the sign of the fast mind, endless curiosity, and limitless communication. Always remembered for charm, lightness, and the ability to connect with anyone. But behind that restless smile, there is a fragile point. An invisible limit that, when crossed, makes Gemini simply lose interest, without warning. Contrary to what many believe, Gemini does not lose interest due to a lack of feelings. They lose interest when something stops making sense inside their mind. And when that happens, there is no going back. Gemini may laugh, talk, and appear present. But their mind never stops. They analyze silences, notice subtle changes, and sense when the connection no longer flows as it once did. When something breaks internally, they don't argue, they don't insist, they don't dramatize. They simply disconnect. And when the mind leaves, the heart follows. Do you want to know the 5 reasons that make Gemini lose interest in love? Get ready, because number 5 will surprise you. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Your energy strengthens this space and connects us even more deeply to the universe of the signs. The loss of mental connection. For Gemini, love never begins with touch. It is born in thought. Mental connection is the true gateway to the Gemini heart. It is through conversations, shared ideas, unexpected questions, and answers that reveal depth that Gemini feels alive within a relationship. When this exchange exists, they get involved, they give themselves, and they stay. But when it starts to disappear, something essential breaks. Gemini needs to feel that there is mutual curiosity. They fall in love with the way the other person thinks, with how they interpret the world, with the nuances hidden in a simple conversation. Empty silences, automatic responses, or dialogues that don't evolve create a silent discomfort. It's not immediate boredom, it's the subtle perception that the mind is no longer being stimulated as before. Many confuse this need with superficiality, but the truth is the opposite. Gemini seeks intellectual depth, not emotional monotony. They want to be heard, challenged, and provoked to think. When Gemini feels that their ideas are ignored, minimized, or received without genuine interest, they begin to withdraw internally. They may still be physically present, they may still smile, but their mind has already begun the process of pulling away. The loss of mental connection does not happen abruptly. It arises when conversations stop flowing, when curiosity turns into obligation, and when exchange becomes repetition. Gemini notices every micro-change: response time, the absence of questions, disguised disinterest. They don't confront it immediately because first they try to understand. But while they observe, something inside them slowly starts to shut down. When this disconnection settles in, Gemini begins to feel alone within the relationship. And for a sign that lives through communication, mental loneliness is unbearable. It's not about talking a lot, it's about feeling real presence on the other side. Without that, the bond loses its meaning. The most delicate part is that when Gemini loses the mental connection, they rarely try to force themselves to stay. For them, love should not be constant effort but natural exchange. If the minds no longer meet, the heart understands that insisting would betray their own essence. And so, silently, interest dissolves, not because of a lack of feeling but because the foundation that sustained the love no longer exists. The feeling of control or imprisonment. For Gemini, freedom is not a luxury, it is a vital necessity. This is not about the absence of commitment, but about the ability to be who they are without feeling the need to constantly explain themselves. When Gemini loves, they give themselves with presence, curiosity, and communication. However, the moment they perceive attempts at control, excessive demands, or emotional surveillance, something deep inside them begins to close. The feeling of imprisonment can arise in subtle ways. It doesn't have to be a direct prohibition. It can appear through constant questions, mistrust disguised as care, or rigid expectations about behavior, schedules, or choices. Gemini quickly notices when their mental freedom is being limited. And when that happens, interest begins to weaken, even if feelings still exist. This sign needs space to think, move, talk, change their mind, and explore possibilities. When Gemini feels they must walk on eggshells to avoid conflict, their mind enters a state of alert. They begin to feel watched, analyzed, and little by little, emotionally cornered. Love, which should expand, starts to compress. Contrary to what many imagine, Gemini does not run away out of irresponsibility. They run when they feel they are losing their identity. Relationships based on silent control, such as constant jealousy, demands for proof of love, or attempts to shape their personality, create deep emotional wear. Gemini does not react with immediate confrontation. First, they try to adapt, to explain, to ease the atmosphere through dialogue. But if they realize the pattern continues, distance becomes inevitable. Emotional imprisonment can also come from a lack of trust. When Gemini feels that everything they do is questioned, interpreted, or judged, they understand there is no safe space to be authentic. And without authenticity, the bond loses meaning. They would rather distance themselves than live a love where they must shrink. Repetition without emotion. For Gemini, life needs internal movement. Not necessarily chaos, but stimulation, surprise, and emotional renewal. When a relationship enters a cycle of repetition without emotion, something slowly begins to fade inside them. What once sparked curiosity starts to feel predictable. What once generated enthusiasm turns into habit. And for Gemini, loving without feeling life in the exchange is like having a conversation without words. The repetition that pushes Gemini away is not tied to routine itself, but to the absence of emotional presence within it. Gemini understands that every relationship builds habits, but they need to feel that, even within daily life, there is still genuine interest, living exchange, and real attention. When everything becomes mechanical, conversations, meetings, gestures, the magic begins to dissolve. Gemini quickly notices when the relationship shifts into autopilot. The same phrases, the same reactions, the same silences. There is no more discovery, no surprise, no emotional exchange that stimulates their mind. They feel as if they are reliving the same emotional day over and over, without growth or deepening. And this creates a silent emptiness. Many interpret this withdrawal as immaturity or a constant search for superficial novelty. But in truth, Gemini is searching for meaning. They need to feel that the relationship evolves, that both people transform together, that new layers continue to be revealed. When everything stays the same for too long, Gemini begins to ask, is this all there is? Repetition without emotion also appears when the other person stops truly engaging. When responses become automatic, when interest is no longer renewed, when there is no mutual curiosity. Gemini feels when the flame is no longer being fed. They don't demand constant intensity, but they need to feel that there is emotional life there. When this monotony settles in, Gemini does not end things immediately. They observe, try to provoke change, introduce new topics, suggest different experiences. But if they realize the other person does not move with them, emotional fatigue appears. The mind begins to seek stimulation outside the relationship, not necessarily in another person but in other interests, thoughts, and internal paths. In the end, repetition without emotion makes Gemini lose interest because they feel stuck. And for a sign that lives through internal movement, emotional stagnation is the beginning of the end. Love, for Gemini, needs to breathe, reinvent itself, and pulse. Without that, the bond loses color, loses sound, and slowly dissolves into silence. When the feeling of control settles in, Gemini begins to seek freedom internally. Their thoughts drift away, their attention disperses, and their emotional presence diminishes. This is not coldness, it is self-protection. For Gemini, true love respects movement, individuality, and the right to breathe. In the end, Gemini does not lose interest because they want to leave, but because staying would mean giving up themselves. And for a sign that lives through the mind and expression, that is a price too high for any relationship. The lack of emotional presence. For Gemini, emotional presence means feeling that the other person is truly there, not just physically but in an attentive, receptive, and connected way. This sign notices nuances that many ignore: the tone of a response, the length of a silence, the energy behind words. When this presence begins to fail, Gemini feels it even before being able to explain it. The lack of emotional presence does not show up only in big absences. It appears in the details: cold responses, interest that feels forced, divided attention, conversations that never deepen. Gemini realizes when they are talking alone within the relationship. And for someone who lives through exchange, this creates an immediate emptiness. Even though Gemini is communicative, they don't like to beg for attention. When they feel they have to ask for presence, something breaks internally. They understand that true interest manifests spontaneously. If the other person is emotionally distant, even while physically close, Gemini begins to withdraw to protect themselves. This withdrawal happens silently. They may still be there, talking, laughing, maintaining the appearance of normality. But inside they begin to disconnect. Their mind interprets emotional absence as a clear sign that the bond is no longer a priority for the other person. And Gemini does not stay where they are not consciously chosen. The pain of lacking emotional presence is deep because it touches the Gemini essence: the need for living exchange. This is not about drama or excessive neediness, but about reciprocity. Gemini needs to feel that their words matter, that their emotions are received, that their energy finds an echo. When this does not happen, they begin to feel invisible. And emotional invisibility is something Gemini cannot tolerate for long. They would rather step away than continue offering attention where there is no genuine response. Many people only notice this withdrawal when it is already too late. Because Gemini does not announce their pain. They observe, understand, and when they realize that emotional presence will not return, they move on. Not out of coldness but out of respect for themselves. In the end, the lack of emotional presence makes Gemini lose interest because love, for them, must be lived in the now, with exchange, listening, and real involvement. Without that, the bond becomes empty. And where there is no presence, Gemini does not remain. When they stop feeling heard. For Gemini, being heard is not a detail of love. It is the very foundation of connection. They express themselves to organize thoughts, understand emotions, and create bonds. Speaking, for Gemini, is a way of existing within the relationship. When they realize that their words do not meet real listening, something essential breaks in a silent yet definitive way. This is not just about hearing sounds or responding out of politeness. Gemini feels when the other person truly listens with attention, curiosity, and presence. They notice when there is genuine interest and when their words are merely tolerated. Constant interruptions, automatic responses, or a lack of emotional involvement are clear signs that they are not truly being heard. And for Gemini, this is deeply demotivating. At first, they try to repeat themselves, explain in another way, bring new words in order to be understood. They believe in dialogue and trust that communication can restore the bond. But when they realize they speak and nothing changes, that their feelings are minimized or ignored, their energy begins to withdraw. Their speech decreases, enthusiasm fades, and interest starts to disappear. This is one of the most surprising reasons why Gemini loses interest, because often the feeling is still there. What is lost is not love, but the willingness to keep trying to be understood. Gemini understands that insisting on speaking where there is no listening is emotional exhaustion. The pain of not being heard strikes at the center of Gemini's identity. They need to feel that their ideas have space, that their emotions are validated, and that their voice matters. When this doesn't happen, they begin to feel alone even when accompanied. And this mental loneliness is a non-negotiable limit. When Gemini stops feeling heard, they do not confront aggressively. They fall silent. And this silence is not a strategy, it is an internal goodbye. Little by little, they stop sharing, stop opening up, stop investing emotionally. The distancing happens even before a visible breakup. In the end, Gemini doesn't leave because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of true dialogue. Because for them, loving means being heard, understood, and welcomed through words. When that is lost, interest dissolves naturally. And when Gemini goes completely silent, it's because they have already decided to move on. If this message touched you in any way, this is your sign. Confirm that you received this message from the universe by writing 0606 in the comments. This number represents alignment, clarity, and emotional awareness, exactly what Gemini needs to love with truth. Now, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you don't miss any important messages, and share this video with someone who needs to better understand the paths of love and the mind. Your interaction strengthens this space and keeps this energy in motion. See you in the next sign.